Next to Alice Taplin's series of interviews about the Shorncliffe Redoubt. From the Martello Towers to the Royal Military Canal, there's evidence all around us of the southeast defence systems during the time of the Napoleonic threat. But one precious piece of military history has been hidden away on the edge of the Shorncliffe Plain next to Seabrook for the past few decades. The Shorncliffe Redoubt is situated on top of Hospital Hill and was the base for the brigade commanded by Sir John Moore. Christopher Shaw, the general manager of the Shorncliffe Redoubt Trust, has made it his duty to restore the site and make sure it gets the respect it deserves. This week on Explore Kent, our reporter Alice Taplin visited the site with Christopher and started by asking him what the Shorncliffe Redoubt is.
Shorncliffe Redoubt was built at the end of the 17th century as a defensive position against the threat of invasion by Napoleon. It's a 300-foot by 300-foot square earth defence, and it's made out of green sand.
So can you give us a tour of the site?
I'd love to. As you can see, it's heavily overgrown. None of this was here when it was originally built. This position here could see the ships leaving Boulogne, so hopefully we'll be prepared to repel the invaders.
Okay, let's have a walk around.
You enter the redoubt through the northwest corner, so it's quite nice. As you come in from the car park, you walk up a small path on your right, and that leads you straight up onto the ramparts. I'll show you through, and you'll suddenly see how impressive this overgrown site is. This was quite a simple fort. They didn't just sort of dig out the moat and throw the sand up. They actually layered it. So it was green sand, turf, green sand, turf. The green sand holds up very well, and it's a really good building material, especially for redoubt.
Why is it significant that it be built on that particular terrain?
Looking at the position that this redoubt's been put in, it doesn't take a military genius to work out this is one of the best vantage points in Kent. Not only can you see France, but you can see all the way around Hythe Bay to Dungeness. Just a great vantage point and a beautiful view, one of the best views in Kent and certainly in England. So Folkestone's very lucky to have this.
When the Shorncliffe Redoubt was first built, was it used primarily as a military base, or was it used more as a lookout?
It was here to actually as a military base. Interestingly enough, as a lookout point, the buildings that we can actually find from research, we're not sure how high they actually went. The redoubt is actually around about sort of 40, 50 yards from the front edge of the cliff. It's quite low down, it's quite low profile. It would have been covered in grass. Therefore, it'd be hard to see. When Sir John Moore came here in 1803, and the 95th Rifles Regiment of Foot were joined with the 43rd and the 52nd Light Infantry Regiments. You had roughly around about 3,500 people here, and obviously with the military. So it's quite a substantial base.
Does it have any connection to the other military sites around here, such as the Martello Towers and the canal?
Fantastic question. Absolutely. Moore's job here in 1803 was to assess the defences on the south coast with Colonel Twist, who designed Shorncliffe. He was a military architect. They came up with the idea of the Martello Tower. So you could say the Martello Tower was born at Shorncliffe. Moore in the Mediterranean fought against a round fortress at Martello Point in Corsica. It took the Royal Navy 3 days to bombard it, and with no effect, and they actually had to land and finally set it alight before they could actually get it. And Moore obviously took that and was so impressed with it, he came up with a British version, which is named the Martello Tower.
There are a couple of Martello Towers situated near the redoubt. If the redoubt is so strong, why did it need Martello Towers as well?
The redoubt is very strong because it's built of sand, and obviously if you try and it's very high up, so you can't really shell it. You'd have to drop mortar bombs into it, which would be very hard. Obviously anything that hits the walls gets buried. But the problem is it's a numbers game. We never had enough. With 170,000 Frenchmen across the sea coming here, all that 3,000 soldiers could do was put up a token defence. Moore suddenly realised that this redoubt, which he and Twist were going to expand, was actually pretty useless. And would be fairly overwhelmed pretty quickly. So his tactic wasn't to stop them, it was to slow them down, as the same tactic we were going to use in the Second World War against Hitler. So Moore realised there was no point putting his men in here, he'd rather have them out in the field fighting. So strength-wise, it was good, but really it wouldn't have survived if it had been invaded.
So now we're walking over to the corner to have a look at the ramparts.
So if you come to the edge, now imagine that you've got a 3-4 metre moat all the way round. You've got wooden stakes all the way in the facing of this in a line to stop people climbing up it, as well as small volley guns and so on. Men 3 ranks deep, waiting for the French to crawl on their hands and knees up the steep slopes. As they get to the top, already being shot at by riflemen they haven't been able to see, the riflemen have rushed back in, and the 52nd, 43rd and Pitt's militia are waiting in here. And as the French form on the ridge to charge, they're literally swept away by volleys. It's a great little defensive position, but it wouldn't last more than maybe 2 to 3 days. But by that time, all the troops can come down from London, from Ashford, from Canterbury, from Dover. We were only meant to hold. That was our job. This was going to be the sacrifice.
So after the threat of Napoleonic invasion had ceased, how was the redoubt used?
Well, after around about sort of 1840s, it was well known that this was not a nice place to actually stay. You had the earth redoubt, you had buildings inside, but the riflemen were intent out on the flat plain behind the redoubt. Obviously this wasn't good enough. So they started building wooden huts. Obviously in Victorian era this changed into what we now see in the camp, with the fantastic billets and gymnasiums and some of the artefacts that's left. Obviously then during the First World War, bombed. Second World War, it was machine gunned. And you can see the traces of that in the cemetery on the gravestones.
Now it's time for the second half of Alice's Explore Kent interviews with Christopher Shaw about the Shorncliffe Redoubt, a large fortification on the edge of the Shorncliffe Plain, dating from the 1790s and built to defend Britain against possible invasion from Napoleon's forces. The troops there were commanded by Sir John Moore, whose name now graces some of the army barracks and land in Shorncliffe nearby. In the second half of this feature, Christopher takes Alice through the overgrown redoubt site to the Sally Port, one of the entrances to the fort.
So we're coming down into the Sally Port here. The Sally Port was on the south side of the redoubt and was just a very simple entrance with a drawbridge over it. But behind it would be a cannon, so if they got through the door, there'd be a cannon there which would sweep anybody away. Time Team tried to investigate if there was an armoury, underground armoury built as laid out in the plans. We found nothing of that. Again, they were looking for evidence of a gun battery on here. Again, we didn't find evidence of there. But I do have anecdotal evidence that there were cannons here. We believe we know where they are, and that we will be looking to uncover them, so which would be fantastic because they've been buried somewhere on site.
So are you saying there are actually cannons here, or just the basis of where they stood?
We believe there could be cannons here. The way, obviously, getting rid of them in the old days was, especially the old cannons which are no longer used, was to dig a big hole and stick them in there. We've actually know the positions of 2 of them, and obviously once we take over the ground, it'll be a pleasure bringing young archaeologists up here to try and find them again. But we're looking to try and preserve them as well as explore them. I can take you through the Sally Port. This would be the moat. You can suddenly see from looking upwards, you suddenly realise, if you imagine there'd be a array of spikes along wooden stakes along here. So once you're actually in the moat, you can't bypass them to climb up the side. And the defenders would be throwing down grenades onto you. Obviously there'd be probably wooden spikes, metal nails on boards in here to make anybody stepping on them. They'd throw everything down, literally everything, as well as on here they might even mine it. So if it looked desperate, they'd actually blow it up in their people's faces. So, it's for a small fort, it could pack quite a big punch. So now we're halfway between Shorncliffe Redoubt and the front face of the cliff. And unfortunately, all the undergrowth has grown up, so you actually can't see the view out to Boulogne and France, which is incredibly beautiful, and is obviously the reason why this redoubt here. Also, the redoubt is absolutely buried in woodland undergrowth. I know in the Victorian times, the Brigadier's house was put in the centre of Shorncliffe as the camp behind it developed and grew into what it is today. We know the house is quite substantial. We also know that the interior of the redoubt was planted up and was turned into a formal garden for obviously the Brigadier and his wife. And we also believe that they removed a section of the redoubt so the Brigadier's wife could have a nice view out from her bedroom window. That's probably unsubstantiated. The one thing we would like to find is we know 100 years, on the 100th anniversary of Sir John Moore's death, there was a tree planted at Shorncliffe for him. I would love to find that out. I think I know what it could be, but we were told, we believe it's an oak tree, but I don't think it was. I think it was meant to have come from his family's estate, but I think that could be wrong. Because obviously, out of all the trees here, there is only one that stands out, and it's a Scots pine. And obviously Sir John Moore was from Glasgow, and it seems strange that out of all these trees here that we have one lone Scots pine. I would like to think that that was the one, and no, certainly for the Trust, it's the one that we would like to keep here, because again, we're not here to remove all the trees. We're here about opening up Shorncliffe and the park, and obviously just to start showing people what heritage they've got here.
Now for the final part of Alice's Exploring Kent interviews with Christopher Shaw about the Shorncliffe Redoubt. Although it's now hidden in trees on the edge of the Shorncliffe Plain, it was once one of the major defensive points protecting Britain from invasion by Napoleon in the late 1700s. Some of the history on the site, though, is more recent. In this third and final part of the feature, Chris talks about the First World War trenches used to train troops that are now situated below the redoubt next to the track known as Sandy Lane.
So you come down Sandy Lane, about halfway down, and on the right-hand side, barricaded with some sticks and logs, are two posts. And these were the gates that would lead through to the trench training area. And just beyond that are the First World War trenches. I'll take you through now, and you can see the classic zigzag traces of where the old trenches were. I mean, you'll find this in Belgium, you'll find this in France. Beauty about it being here is we want to invite schools and students and families that can't afford to go to Belgium or France to view original trenches, to experience original trenches. You know, this is where the young men were alive, and they probably all thought it would be over by Christmas, and it was a bit of a fun, jumping in and out trenches, digging holes and enjoying themselves with their mates. But as we all know, the reality is they crossed 26 miles and went to France, and that was a big difference. It got a lot more serious, especially as the war drew on, because as they're training here, the young recruits that came here, by the time they're here 1916, 1917, they can hear the guns going off in France. So they must have known that what their fate was awaiting them, and that must have been a huge sea change of attitude here.
We know that many men went through Folkestone to go and fight in the trenches. Were many of those also trained at Shorncliffe?
Yes, they were. Shorncliffe obviously has been a training base for years. So that training would have been carried on all through the First World War, and obviously still in the Second World War.
So you're from the Shorncliffe Redoubt Trust. Can you tell us a bit about what you're planning to do with the site?
Currently, we're actually putting in applications for Heritage Lottery Fund, for the Coastal Communities Fund, as well as looking at sponsors, stakeholders, angels, people to come in, and local people to get involved. And obviously, money is the key. This is a big project. we're looking at 5 to 6 million to get this up and running. But we're going to do it in a phased development. Our first phase is to purchase the land and to clear the land and open up paths for abled and disabled people. We want to open up picnic areas. We want to open up cycle areas. There is a very well-known a BMX trail site on ground. We want to keep it. Phase 2 is our educational phase. We will be building replicas of First World War trenches, as well as opening up a battlefield area for putting on displays, reenactments. The key is obviously the education side. We want to build 2 sets of trenches, one for one German side and one British side. And within the British side, we will be looking at one which is 100% authentic. And what we want to do is, rather than kids come and walk through it, we actually want to put them in the uniform. We want to give them the full training. We want to give them a feel of the weapons. We want to talk about conscientious objectors and their involvement within the First World War. We want to talk about battlefield casualties. We want to talk about medicine. We want to put roles of women and how that changed. But finally, we actually want to put students into the trenches and give them the full experience. And our final phase is putting up the visitor centre. We have plans of the original buildings. So we want to bring those back into the Redoubt, and that way it will be true living history.
The story of the Shorncliffe Redoubt will be very local, but how significant do you think it will be in attracting tourism?
I'm working with an educational tour company, and they would like to bring around about 300 students a day down here. Obviously, for tourism and for the knock-on effects of that in the local community, for hotels, boarding places, it'd be massive. And that's just students. That doesn't look at adult visitors. Shorncliffe has a lot of things going for it. And obviously, what we want to do is also provide jobs for local people.
You have very ambitious plans for the site. How confident are you in raising the money?
I and my support have dedicated 8 years to this project. We wouldn't have started, I wouldn't have taken my first step if I didn't believe that this would get done. We are working on some major fundraising projects. One of them is Jumpers for Goalposts, which is we are working with the Belgians to organise the Christmas truce. I'm hopefully going to push forward Shorncliffe to be part of the chain of Napoleonic cities. Now that would be great for tourism, because we'd be the only UK site that is actually twinned with all the other Napoleonic towns and cities across Europe. Again, that will attract funding to us.
And finally, you mentioned that you needed people to get involved. What opportunities are there for people to be involved with the Redoubt and the Trust, and how can they go about volunteering?
Currently, the skills that we need are people to help us with the business of setting up the trust and securing the money. Once that's done, I always said I wanted to raise an army here, and that's what we want. It is about putting in, obviously in the first phase, clearing parts of the land, clearing the scrub, putting in paths. At the same time, secondly, it's having reenactors here and having people who want to learn about historical interpretation coming involved with heritage and tourism. So there's lots of opportunities. We'd like to get a force of about 200 volunteers here, because we're going to need people in uniform working here. And that's what this land should be about. It should be bringing it back to people and making it live again. So volunteers, we can't do it without you. We're just redoing our website at the moment. We've just started a Twitter feed as well. And we want people to come and join us and bring their families and experience what a great site this is.
Christopher Shaw, General Chairman of the Shorncliffe Redoubt Trust, speaking to Alice Taplin. If you want to visit the site of the Redoubt and the First World War training trenches nearby, it's at the woodland on the edge of the Shorncliffe Plain at the top of Hospital Hill. You can park near the entrance to Sandy Lane and the military cemetery. It's well worth a visit. To find their website, just Google Shorncliffe Trust.